United Nations climate scientists have just released a landmark report on what needs to happen to ensure a livable future on this planet.
Emissions of greenhouse gases need to peak within the next 3 years if we're to stave off the worst effects of climate change.
The UN grabbing the world by the shoulders and shaking it, saying, don't you get it? You know, time is really running out. You have to act now.
According to new United Nations report, the devastating impacts of human-caused climate change are happening now. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, said that today's IPCC report is a necklace of human suffering and the damning indictment of failed climate leadership. Nearly half of humanity is living in the danger zone now. Many ecosystems are at the point of no return now. And those impacts are getting worse and could be potentially be irreversible. The report lays bare multiple threats such as weather extreme drought and fire that have already disrupted human life and natural ecosystems. In some cases, beyond the point where others are able to adapt. According to Rebecca Carter from the World Resources Institute said that the report makes it clear that those impacts are more widespread and happening more quickly than we thought previously.
Well, Donna, it is chaos, really. You hear the emergency sirens going, but I need to show you, it's not just on the border. This is Fort McMurray burning.
The report stresses that significant change needs to occur in the next decade to prevent irreversible damage. Antonio Guterres also said that science tells us that we'll require the world to cut emissions by 45% by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050. What's new in this report are multiple adaptation strategies that can be successful if the global temperature rise is limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Rebecca Carter also said that with the types of solutions that we are implementing now, rather than waiting until later, we are likely to save money in the future. Viable solutions are on the table, but scientists and experts are urging action now, not later.
It is because the next few years are critical, say the researchers. Because if emissions aren't curbed by 2030, it will make it impossible to limit warming later this century. UN scientists have unveiled a plan that they believe can limit the root cause of dangerous climate change. A key UN body says in a report that there must be rapid, deep, and immediate cuts in carbon dioxide emission. Global emission of carbon dioxide would need to peak within 3 years to stave off the world's impact. Even then, the world would also need technology to suck carbon dioxide from the skies by mid-century. After a contentious approval session where scientists and government officials went through the report line by line, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has now published its guidance on what the world can do to avoid an extremely dangerous future. First, the bad news: even if all the policies to cut carbon that governments have put in place by the end of 2020 were fully implemented, the world will still warm by 3.2 Celsius this century. Some government and business leaders are saying one thing, but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the result will be catastrophic. The sort of temperature rise would see our planet hit by unprecedented heat wave, terrifying storm, and widespread weather shortages. To avoid that fate, the world must keep the rise in temperature at or under 1.5 degrees this century, say researchers. To put in context, the amount of carbon dioxide that the world has emitted in the last decade is the same amount that left to us to stay under this key temperature threshold. I think the report tells us that we have reached the now or never point of limiting warming to 1.5 degree, said IPCC lead author Helen de Koning, who is professor of socio-technical innovation and climate change at Eindhoven University of Technology. Speaking to BBC News, she said, "We have to peak our greenhouse gas emission before 2025 and after that reduce them very rapidly. And we will have to do negative emission or carbon dioxide removal in the second half of the century, shortly after 2050, in order to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius."
Thinking about all the reports from IPCC and why it's still a problem until now, we can realize that most of us didn't really care that much into this problem. But why is it hard to care about climate change? Well, one of the reasons why it's hard to care about climate change is because between 1997 and 2009, climate change covered in 27 countries made up just 0.6% of total reporting. You can imagine a huge existential threat to all life on the earth, and we're not just really talking about it. How did this happen? This happened because most of us didn't relate with this topic. Besides that, many people do not have access or time to research the science on their own. The fact that climate change is a very complex problem makes people lose interest about it. Recent Oxford study found these common barriers between the lack of climate change topic with other topic. Climate change happens slowly, but the news cycles is fast. The topic depressed audience covering it requires money to travel or specialized reporters. There are pressure from media bosses and advertise to cover other topics. All this means the topic is underreported, and all that little reporting also used to be full of misinformation. Then, what's the solution about this problem? Let's start with the science. Climate science needs to be more accessible and also easier to comprehend. More scientific publications need to be open access, and complicated topics need to be more relatable. Also, focusing on collective power over individual responsibility can also help.
And that's the solution of why it's hard to care about climate change. But what's the solution to stop climate change? Well, according to IPCC report, the reports conclude that further delays in cutting carbon pollution and preparing for impacts already in pipeline will miss a brief and rapidly closing window for opportunity to secure livable and sustainable future for all. The main focus of the report is on winning the global economy of fossil fuels and moving to low or zero carbon source of energy, from solar and wind to nuclear, hydro and hydrogen. Helping that transition is the fact that renewable energy is now cheaper than energy generated by fossil fuels in the most markets. The IPCC also details ways to reduce demand of oil, gas and coal, whether by making buildings more energy efficient or encouraging shifts in lifestyle, such as eating less beef and not flying halfway around the world for a holiday or business meeting. We can conclude for the report that the transition to a renewable energy from fossil fuels and shift in lifestyle are a few of the methods to cutting the carbon pollution and might slow down the climate change.